Hello, in the following video, we're going to see Shopify Web Pixels. These are JavaScript code snippets that run on the store and collect behavioral data, also known as customer events, throughout the whole purchasing experience, which covers the store's storefront, checkout, and post-purchase pages. The purpose these events serve is to send data from the actions the customer has taken in the store to analytic platforms for it to be processed as needed. An analytics platform in this case could be something like Google Tag Manager, Facebook's Pixel, Segment, or any other analytics platform that relies on adding a JavaScript snippet in the page head to track some behavioral information. This is an example of the JavaScript you will get from those platforms. In this case, this is Google Tag Managers. As you can see, it's a script tag where its content is a block of minified JavaScript, which then exposes some functions for you to call when you want to track an event. Previously, those snippets needed to be added in a couple of places. First, in your layout file, in this case, theme.liquid, usually they'll be placed somewhere along the head tag or at the end of the body tag, depending on what script you are injecting and what instructions the platform suggested. Also, if you were in Shopify Plus, you will need to repeat this in checkout.liquid to track events that happen at checkout and in the post-purchase pages. Lastly, if you wanted to track events in the order status page, you will need to do so through this menu in the Settings tab over here. You will have to place your additional script over here. As you can see mentioned here, pixels are now available and recommended over additional scripts for conversion tracking, as these can be more accurate, secure, and performant. This doesn't mean that previous methods will stop working yet. It just means that web pixels have a deeper integration into the Shopify platform. So let's see why is that. First of all, accurate. These are more accurate because we will subscribe to Shopify events directly. This makes it much simpler to get notified when some of the most important events happen in the store. For example, usually you'll want to track when a product is added to the cart. With the previous model, you will need to figure out all the places in the theme that had the add to cart functionality, which can be far more places than the product page. For example, some stores have an add to cart button in the collection page for every item there. Also in your cart, if you increase the quantity of an item, that should also count as an add to cart event. Some themes will even let you add arbitrary sections that have their own add to cart call to action. So keeping track of all of that yourself is error prone unless you design the theme from scratch with that in mind. This is where the standard events come into play. You can subscribe to any of these and Shopify will notify you when they are triggered, also passing you the relevant data for that event. For example, in the product added to cart event, we will get the full information of the product that was added, while before you will need to find a way to pass that information to your JavaScript code, usually through data attributes. So if I click on this, the data will come in the data property over here. And if I click on this, I will get a cart line. And if I click on this, these are the properties that Shopify will give me initially: the cost, the merchandise, and the quantity. If I wanted to see the properties of the cost, I only get total amount here. And in merchandise, I can expand this and I can get all the information about the product that was added. In this case, this is the variant information, but I can get the parent product information too by expanding on product over here. You might not need to track all of this, or you might need to transform some of this data before sending it to your analytics platform, something like renaming a property, or maybe computing a value based on the value of a property that has been passed to you in this function. And this is how that will look like. In this case, I'll click on Custom Pixel because this is the one I'll be covering in this video, but the process is very similar for App Pixels too. So you will call analytics.subscribe, and this receives two parameters: the event name, which is the exact name that you see over here and that you saw in the previous page, and then a callback function. This function will be called whenever this event is triggered. And in this event parameter, you will get all of the data described in this page. So client lead, context, data, ID, name, timestamp, and type. The event-specific data is in the data property or in custom data for the case of custom events. And let's see a couple of other examples. For example, if I go here in search submitted, the data property here, you can see already that it contains different items. If I keep expanding on this, I'll get different information. The same will happen if I try to go to the checkout completed event, for example. Here I get a checkout object with information relevant to checkout. So this is what Shopify meant with more accurate. And now what about secure? Web Pixels have two important features for this. The first is that Web Pixels are sandboxed, meaning that for sensible information, a pixel can only track it if you explicitly send it as a custom event. This will prevent a pixel from scraping the DOM to gather information about the customer without your consent, or from adding key press event listener to track what the customer is typing, for example. The other feature related to security that Web Pixels have is that they are compatible with the Customer Privacy API, meaning that if your store is using this API correctly and your customers are in a region where they must consent to tracking first, Web Pixels will respect that. And also in regions where it is enabled by default, if a customer opts out of tracking, then the events won't fire anymore. And finally, performant. Web Pixels have the potential of being more performant because Shopify will inject that JavaScript where it deems appropriate. In the previous model, it was up to you where to place that script tag, and that could lead to it unintentionally being placed somewhere where it harmed performance. Now let's quickly talk about how sandboxing works. Depending on how you're creating the web pixel, it will either use the strict or lax sandbox. In the case of custom web pixels, which are the ones we'll cover in this video, they use the lax sandbox. So this one over here. And what this means is that the pixels code will be placed inside an iframe with the allow scripts and allow forms attributes. This will allow most of the scripts code to continue working without further modifications, as globals like window and document will remain available because there are a lot of pixels that depend on those. But of course, as this is inside an iframe that has no access to the parent's globals, they won't contain very useful data. If we needed to get information from the actual window and document objects, Shopify exposes a stripped down version of them that contains some useful information, but not everything. For instance, with the document exposed by Shopify, you can do a query selector to get DOM nodes. We'll see later in the video how all of this looks like. This now brings us to the limitations. As mentioned here, these limitations might not be compatible with some third-party pixels, so the implementation of this will work on a case-by-case basis. So the limitations are the following. Pixels can't render UI elements, which if you think about it, makes sense as they are in an iframe, and you'll see later in the video that the iframe is not visible in the page, so rendering UI there wouldn't make sense anyways. Then we have all of these limitations related to automatic detection through DOM scraping. What this means is using the document object to try and gather information to be tracked. For example, a pixel traditionally could use document.querySelectorAll to get all the buttons in the page and subscribe to the click event, so it can then track when that happens. As custom web pixels are inside an iframe, they can't do that anymore, as the querySelectorAll method will return an empty array. Instead, if you as the store owner want to track that behavior, you will need to add some JavaScript to your store and put it in your theme, and then forward that to the web pixel as a custom event, which it will then push to the analytics service. The same happens for these limitations over here for page scrolling and mouse movement. If the pixel tries adding listeners to those events directly, they will be added to the iframe, where they won't be tracked because the iframe is not something the customer will be interacting with. Therefore, if you wanted to track this behavior, you will need to add it to your store's theme, send it as a custom event, and track it from your web pixel. Also, please note that through web pixels and custom web pixels, you are still tracking customer data. Therefore, all the privacy requirements still apply. So make sure you are in compliance with all the privacy laws and regulations that apply to you and the customers you serve on your store. And speak with a lawyer if you have any questions on that matter. As Shopify mentions over here, you are still responsible for complying with all of that. Now let's see all of this in action. For this, I'm going to create a custom web pixel for Segment, which is a popular tracking platform. Note that Segment already has a Shopify app, although when I checked, it didn't seem to have a web pixel. But even if it did have one, the purpose of this example is so you can see what is the process of integrating one of these platforms as a custom web pixel by yourself. Every pixel is different, but many of them will have something along these lines where they give you a snippet of code and they expect you to place it in your store's code. Now I'm going to copy this snippet of code, and from my store, I'll go to Settings, Customer Events, and add a custom pixel. From here, I'm going to name this pixel Segment, and in this space over here, I'm going to paste what I just copied. Now I have to fix these errors over here, because if I try saving like this, I'm going to get this message telling me that I need to fix the errors before saving. So the first one we have is in this script tag line, And this is because you can think of this code as a JavaScript file. In JavaScript files, you cannot have HTML tags. Therefore, this script tag over here and this script tag over here should be removed. And now we don't have that error any longer. But we still have this unnecessary semicolon error. Now, as this code is modified, it is difficult to see exactly where the unnecessary semicolon is. So let's see how to fix that. I'm going to copy all of this. And in Visual Studio Code, I'm going to paste this and format the document. By formatting the document, everything is in a new line instead of everything being in a single line over here. This is shown in different lines because it is doing line wrap. But if you check the line number, all of this is the second line. But anyways, I'm going to now copy all of this and paste it back over here. And in this case, it seems to be enough to make the error disappear. So it might have been because of some issue when segment minified that code. But regardless, it appears to be now working. So if I save this, I don't get the error message any longer, but I get this warning that I'm not tracking any customer behavior yet, and that's normal because I'm not actually doing anything yet. This line is commented. So the next step will be to start tracking some events. So let's do that. Let's uncomment this line. And from here, I'm going to type the event name that I want to track. In this case, let's use page mute. This editor has autocomplete, which is great for this because the event names are just strings. And now, for now, let's comment this and just console.log the event, the name, and the event, the data. Let's save this. And we have to connect the pixel because right now this is saved, but it is not being injected in the store yet. So I'm going to click on connect, and the pixel should be connected. And over here in the status, we can see that it is connected. Now from the store, if I refresh this and open the console, over here, I'm going to see that the event name is being printed and the event data, which is undefined, is also being printed. And if we check where this is coming from, I refresh the page. Here I'm going to see that this is the code that Shopify is injecting. And if I look over here for event.name, there is my console.log. Now, the iframe where Shopify is putting this, if we look for iframe over here, it should be this one. See? Yes, it is this one. This is a Web Pixels sandbox. And you can see that it is being highlighted over here as just being 4 pixels by 4 pixels, but it is not rendering any UI, and it has an actual height and width of 0 from the style. So here. There is another web pixel, probably from Shopify directly. It is difficult to tell exactly which one of these is the one that we just created, but regardless, this is how the pixels are being injected. So you can see here that even though we are printing event.data, over here in the console, this is undefined. And the reason for this is because in the page view event, the data is empty. This pixel events page view data doesn't have any properties. And if you think about it, it makes sense because for a page view event, the information you need is the URL that the customer is viewing. And that information is available in the window object. Now, if you recall from earlier in the video, in the sandbox, it says that if we try accessing window through window.href, it will return the sandbox URL instead of the top frame URL. We don't want the sandbox URL, we want the actual page URL. So what we can do instead is use the stripped down window version that Shopify gives us. To do that, I can go to context and window. And from here, I can access the location object over here. And from this, try to get href, which is a string containing the entire URL, which is what I want. So let's go to the pixel code once again, and let's remove event data and instead do event.context. Context, window, location, href. And let's save this. And if I refresh the page now, this is undefined. And if I click this, it's because this hasn't refreshed yet. To force a refresh, because pixels take a moment to refresh, I can just disconnect the pixel and connect it right away. And if I refresh the page now, I should see here the URL. And if I navigate to a different page, like this one, for example, the URL being reported here got updated. And this is all looking good, but how do I send this to segment? Well, let's first check that segment is here. For this, I'm going to say window.analytics. I have to prefix this with window because otherwise it will get confused with the Shopify analytics variable that they are injecting over here. So let's click on save here. Let's try refreshing. And here I got it. This is the analytics variable that segment is injecting. And from this one, I'm going to use the track function over here. So let's call just that. And I'm going to pass here the event name, and then URL will be all of this. So let's save this. Let's disconnect or reconnect to make sure that it got updated. And now let's refresh the page and see what we get. It says that window.analytics is not a function. That's because I forgot to add here the track. Let's save, disconnect, and reconnect over here. And there we have it. And now let's go over here. Let's click on debugger. Here we are getting some events, but the one that we just sent is this one over here. And we can see that the data has URL and the URL of the page that I'm in. And as I keep navigating to different pages, for example, to the home page, then to this product page, this should be reported over here. This is when I navigated to the home page and then to this product page. Now let's track another event. So I'm going to copy this code over here. I'm going to paste it over here. Let's remove this line. And the event that I'm going to track is product added to cart. Now, I'm going to remove this object because I'm going to forward directly what is in event.data. And if I save this and disconnect and reconnect to force a refresh, then I can hard refresh this page. And if I go to a product like this one and add it to the cart, I can see over here that product added to the cart is being reported. And all of this information, I get it directly in segment for free. I didn't have to forward this to JavaScript using data attributes. Instead, Shopify directly sends me this in event.data. Something else we can do is track all the events. So let's comment this. And over here, let's change the event name to all events. And we can also track all the standard events and all custom events. Because by using all events, we are also going to be tracking any custom event that the store is emitting. You will see how that looks like in a moment. But for now, let's save this. Let's disconnect and reconnect. And if I go to the store and refresh, let's close this. As I start doing things here, like viewing a collections page, doing a search, for example, snowboard, viewing the cart, going to checkout, you're going to see that all of this is showing here. So search admitted, input focused, page view, checkout started, input blurred. So all of that is being forwarded directly here. And all of the relevant information also comes with it. Some events, as you saw with page view, require additional processing because here you can see that this doesn't show the URL. So what we can do from the pixel is saying if event name is equal to page view, then we are going to treat this differently. Else, let's send this like this. So now I'm going to copy what we did over here, and I'm going to uncomment this. And now if I save this, disconnect, reconnect, and then refresh this page, I'll go back here. I'm going to see that the page view event now contains the URL, and the other events are being tracked normally. So if I keep navigating here and, for example, view a connections page, this should appear over here as connection view with all of the relevant information. Now let's see how we can emit custom events. For this, I'm going to do Shopify.analytics.publish, and here I'm going to put the event name, so custom event, and then here I'm going to pass the data. So I'm going to say data, some data, and this can be a JSON with any shape. If I run this, I get true. We will see why in a second. And now if I go here to segment, I get my custom event. But the data over here, you can see that it was not forwarded. Let's see why. So the reason for that is because here we are passing event data. And for custom events, the data is an event.custom data. So I'm going to save this. And now if I try running this code again, I get the custom event. I should have disconnected this and connected it again, and then refresh this. If I try running this again, I shall see here my custom data is being forwarded to segment now. Now, the reason this returned true is because that means that the event was sent successfully. This can return false if I try sending a standard event as a custom event. So for example, page view is a standard event. And if I try sending this, you will see that I get false, and this didn't get reported over here. This is so Shopify can ensure the data integrity of the standard events, because if you were able to emit standard events like this, then anyone, including a customer, can go to the console when visiting your page and run a line of code like this to report inaccurate data. You can use custom events to track anything, including going over the limitations that I mentioned earlier in the video. For example, if I wanted to track the mouse movement, I can do something like this, where I'm adding a listener to the document mouse move event and then forwarding that information to Shopify Analytics as a custom event, which then my custom web pixel will catch and push into segment. So if I run this and start moving my mouse in the page, I can even visit a different page and run this here again. As I start moving my mouse here, I'm going to get a bunch of mouse move events. And if I click on any of these, I'm going to get here the X and Y coordinates. Just keep in mind what I mentioned earlier in the video, not because you can track it means you should, as you are responsible for how data is handled in your store. Now let's see how this interacts with the customer privacy API. For this, I'm going to do console.log event.name to see all the incoming events over here. I'm going to save this, then disconnect this and reconnect it. And if I refresh the page, I get page viewed over here. If I view a collection page, I get page viewed and collection viewed. So now let's enable the customer privacy API. Now let's see this in action. First, I'm going to add a product to the cart. And you see here that the product added to cart event is fired. But now let's come here and let's load the customer privacy API. So I'm going to copy this and paste this over here. And then I'm going to copy this and paste it here. There's a missing comma here. And now, if I remove all of this and make everything false here, I'm basically rejecting all tracking. So if I now refresh this page, you see that the page view event has not been fired. And if I add this product to the cart, no event has been fired. And from here, this is the last event fired at this time. And if I add another product, we can see that no new events have been fired. So the customer privacy API is working properly with the custom web pixel we just created. If I want to enable tracking again to see everything working, I can load this again and change all of this to true. And you're going to see that all the events that were supposed to be fired while this API had tracking set to false are now being fired because they are being kept track of in the client in case tracking is accepted after some time. So they should now appear over here. Of course, in a real world scenario, you will need to actually have this implemented in your code base or have an app that is using this API correctly for everything to work. I just showed it like this in the console so you get an idea of how this interaction will work. And that's it for this video. If you found it useful, remember to like and subscribe for more Shopify related content, and I'll see you all in the next video.